Welcome everyone to this Tidbits video on personal safety, where we'll discuss how our seeing habits play a big part in keeping us safe off of the roads as well. Now, being a woman, I feel it's important for me to share a few safety tips that I've learned along the way, and my hope is that it may spur you into sharing some safety tips as well. And these tips aren't just for women, they are for everyone's safety. And I would love to hear from you, so write me at steps123utd@gmail.com and I'll share your safety tips with everyone, and even put some of them into a future Tidbits video. So the first thing on the list is to always drive with your doors locked, even if it's summer and the windows are down, because if someone comes along and tries to open your door, having those few extra seconds can make a huge difference. Now, some people instantly think, but what if I go off the road into water and my locks stick in the locked position? Or what if I crash and I can't open my door and escape? Well, first off, the odds of that happening are so low, it's almost unheard of, especially with modern vehicles. And second, there are all kinds of gizmos you can buy to have on hand in case you ever happen to need them. Now, here are two examples of a tool that would help in those type of situations. Now, these little gizmos are called, now wait for it, it's a very long title, an emergency seatbelt cutter and window hammer tool. And I do have one of these in my vehicle because even though I'm not a Girl Scout, I do believe in always being prepared. Now, it's also important to plan where you will place this tool. In my vehicle, I have this perfect little cubby that sits behind my steering wheel, so I keep my tool in there, which is that yellow thing. Mine just happens to have a flashlight as well. So this way, if my car happens to roll or whatever, I know the exact location to go search for my tool. Now, if you don't have a cubby in your vehicle, then you can always buy some heavy-duty Velcro, like the kind in this picture. But make sure it is heavy-duty, because you need to be able to rely on that tool being there if you ever have to reach for it. And it must be acceptable for outdoor use, because in the wintertime, there's kind of like a dew effect, which adds moisture to the air inside your vehicle. So if it says outdoor use, it should handle that little bit of moisture. Okay, so now let's get into how seeing habits fit into our personal safety. Now, for personal safety, you'll still perform the same scans that you'll be learning throughout this course, but for personal safety, while you're performing those scans, don't look through scared eyes, but through alert, mindful eyes, being on guard for anyone or anything that even remotely makes you think, that looks sketchy. And then comes the hard part, trusting that feeling. Now, I'm Canadian, so it's basically in my DNA to be polite and to lend a hand to help anyone I see in need. But when it comes to our personal safety, we need to figure out a happy medium, where we put ourselves first anytime those hackles come up and we start to feel uneasy. And now I'd like to share my story on how I almost learned this the hard way. So the time was around 7 p.m. in late fall, so it was getting dark out, and my student was driving us back to her family's home because the lesson was coming to an end. Now, my student happened to live in the cul-de-sac at the end of her street in a new housing development, and her home was the only occupied home at the moment. Now, as we turned onto her street, I noticed a truck sitting just off of the street with the hood to the engine propped up. And as we got closer, a man stepped out from behind that hood, and he stepped into the street to flag us down. Then, as the man started to walk towards the driver's door, I immediately asked my student to double-check that her door was locked, and I instructed her to only open the window about an inch, which I knew would be enough to hear what he wanted to say. And then I finished up by telling her to let me do the talking. So he came over and started to say how appreciative he was that we stopped, even though we had no choice to stop since he walked into the street in front of us. And he continued on about how worried he was being in this deserted place with a dead battery and no one around to help him and all this jazz. And then he asked if I had any jumper cables, which I did, and he went on some more about how thankful he was. Now, this was back in the early 90s where cell phones were massively huge and cost a fortune, so not many people had them. So his predicament made me feel bad for him, and my young, always wanting to please mind went into helper mode. So I explained that I needed to get my student home, and then I'd come back and help him in a few minutes. So I finished up with my student and headed back. Now, luckily, because of my profession, I did happen to have a cell phone, just like the one in the picture, actually. And so I called my office to let them know what was happening. Now, as I pulled up, the guy was standing near the front of the truck, and my window was still cracked from when we talked earlier, so he was able to hear my side of the conversation. Now, before I even got out of my car, I mentioned that I was just down the street from where my student lived and that I was about to help this construction guy. And I explained what he and his truck looked like, and then I got out and told her his license plate number. Then, without even looking, I just casually called out, mentioning that I was in the process of moving, so my trunk was kind of full and I would have to dig around a bit to find my cables. Then, at my trunk, I bent over, head down, digging in my trunk, not paying any attention to him. And then all of a sudden, I hear the truck start, and he took off so fast, there was literally dust flying. And all I could do was stand there in total shock, with every hair on my body standing straight up, with all of these thoughts of what could have happened rolling through my head. And then when I finally calmed down, I realized that I obviously still had a lot of work to do in the safety department, because I allowed him full freedom of all that area behind me while my head was buried in my trunk like that. I never once thought about where he was or even what he was doing. Anyways, I think you can now understand why including this safety video is very important to me. Alrighty, enough of that. Let's move on to a different subject matter. So now let's talk about staying safe when walking to and from your vehicle. Now, when I first started driving, I used the safety method that most women were told about back then, which was where you take your longest key, usually your car key, and you kind of hold it between your fingers like a claw. And then later we were told that position was apparently wrong and we should hold the key in a different way, kind of like how you would grip the nozzle on a hose or something like that. But you know what? There's a bunch of different ways to stay safe, so I just wanted to mention a few, and now I'll leave it up to you to research further if you're interested. But what I would definitely recommend is to get a personal panic alarm. They come in all forms and even in a keychain, and they're not very expensive. But I would try to get one that has a low battery warning if possible. But hey, if you'd rather go with a cutesy one, if yours doesn't have a low battery warning, then I would just check that battery is working at least every 6 months. And then I'd put a fresh one in once a year or so, maybe on a birthday or another date that's easy to remember. And FYI, there's even ones that have GPS location and emergency notifications, and ones that you can put on like a wristwatch, which were designed for joggers, but work great in this case too. So just as I mentioned earlier, go investigate what you think will work best with your life. Okay, now the last thing I want to talk about is parking lots. And the most important thing that I need you to hear is, please don't think you're safe just because it's daylight. Now, I could give you all kinds of stats that would scare the heck out of you, but that's not what I'm trying to do. I just want you to be aware that parking lots can have all kinds of areas that criminals thrive in, such as high structural walls, blind spots, and all kinds of dark areas, stairwells that aren't used much, gardens that are landscaped with tall plants, and then top it off with limited cameras, and it's ripe for attracting criminals. So, day or night, you need to be aware of your surroundings. And that's why I beg you, please put your phone in your pocket until you're back at your car with your doors locked. Otherwise, you could make yourself a target to any predator watching, because they know a distracted person is an easy target. So put that cell away and start using the seeing habits that we're talking about in this side street driving series. Now let's talk about what we're parked beside. So when you're looking for a parking spot, everyone loves it when you find a spot close to the store. But if you're alone, I wouldn't compromise parking beside a sketchy looking van or anything else that gave me pause, just to save walking a little bit farther. So I would recommend picking a spot like the one marked with the green check mark, where you would be getting out of your vehicle beside a small car, not a big van. Now, when you return to your car, if that vehicle that you originally parked beside has now been replaced by that aforementioned sketchy van, especially one like this van where you can't even see inside, well then I would do something like this. So the first thing I would do would be to free up my hands and put whatever I bought either in my trunk, or I'd go to the passenger side and put my stuff in that way. And then, if it's daylight, I would wait until I see that there's someone walking towards me, where if I hurry, I can get into my car, and if anything was to go sideways, that person would definitely see that someone was trying to grab me. Now, if it was in the evening or late night, I would go a step further. I would wait until I saw a man and a woman together walking towards me, and then I would simply ask if they would mind waiting while I get into my car. And believe me, they never mind waiting. In fact, most of the time the woman says, "Oh, that is such smart thinking." And honestly, you're not going to be coming out to find your car parked next to a van like this very often. So once in a blue moon, yeah, be a little extra cautious, and all it's going to cost you is possibly a few minutes of your time. Now earlier, I did mention to stay off your phone, but your phone can be a great tool whenever you start to feel uneasy. Now, myself, I have 911 right in my contacts, so if you take a few seconds right now to place 911 in your contacts, well then it's there, ready to go, and if there's any sign of trouble, you just press one button and help is on the way. Now, if you ever do need to do this, as soon as you start talking, give them your location first and then your name. Then start describing everything you can about the person or people who are bothering you. Give great details like a license plate, their age, ethnicity, hair, etc. This way, they hear for themselves that law enforcement have some identifying details, and this will make it less likely things will escalate. Now, the last thing I'll leave you with is this. At some point, we will get into stall parking, and there is a lot of data that says it's safer for you to back into a parking stall so that you can drive out of it when you leave. But in terms of this type of safety, I want to give you something to think about before you choose. So, if I'm planning to run in for something quick, well then I'll back in, since a small bag or two is easy to manage. But if I know that I'm coming back to my car with a lot of bags, well then I pull in, so that way my trunk is right there, and I won't have to walk by any other vehicles with my hands full to reach my trunk. Now, one day soon, this will become a personal choice for you to make as well. But for right now, as you're learning to drive, you'll need to become very comfortable backing into a parking stall for your road test. So just worry about that right now and deal with this other stuff later. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. We are done. So that means we've arrived at that point where I ask if you found these videos helpful. Then besides telling everyone you know about these videos, I simply ask, could you please hit that like button? And subscribe to keep this knowledge flowing your way. And if you're itching for the next video, hit that bell so you will know immediately when it becomes available. I mean, come on, how can you possibly turn this face down? Alrighty, so goodbye for now, and I will see you when I see you. So take care and stay safe.